The Texas sun beat mercilessly down on the dry earth of Bear Mallister's ranch. The land, once lush and full of life, now lay under the oppressive heat, the cattle grazing listlessly in the distant fields. Bear, at 34, had spent his life working these cattle and tending to his land, but today felt different. There was a tension in the air, something that gnawed at him, though he couldn't quite place it. It all started that morning. Bear was repairing a broken fence near the creek, the sound of the hammer echoing off the rocks as he worked. His mind had drifted to the usual worries, prices at the market, the upcoming drought, the herd. But then he noticed something. A small figure stumbled across his land, weaving unsteadily toward the creek. Bear squinted, the heat shimmering in the air, making it hard to make out the details. But as the figure grew clearer, he realized it was a child. She was no more than 8 or 9 years old, her clothes torn and ragged, traditional Native American garments that had clearly seen better days. As Bear watched, he could see the signs of hunger, the way each step took more effort than the last. Most ranchers in these parts would have reached for their rifle, cautious of the Comanche raids that had been part of life in these parts for years. But Bear wasn't like most men. His father had taught him to show mercy, to judge each person on their actions, not their tribe. Bear set down his tools, wiping the sweat from his brow, as he slowly approached the girl. His hands were visible, his movements deliberate. The last thing he wanted was to alarm her. But as he got closer, he saw the fear in her eyes. She was starving, her lips cracked with dehydration, her small hands clutching at her stomach. She spoke quickly in Comanche, words Bear couldn't understand, but the message was clear. She was desperate. Bear knelt before her, his voice soft. "You need food?" The girl nodded, her eyes still filled with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. He couldn't just leave her here. He made the decision in that moment, without thinking about the consequences. Without a second thought, he scooped her up in his arms, carrying her toward his cabin. She weighed nothing, as though the life had been drained from her, her small body trembling in his grasp. Inside the cabin, Bear set her down on the only chair in the small room. He moved quickly, preparing what food he could find. Some leftover stew from the night before, fresh bread he'd baked that morning. The girl didn't speak, but Bear could see the way her eyes lit up when she saw the food. She ate ravenously, as though she hadn't tasted food in days. As Bear watched her, something caught his eye, a necklace, partially hidden beneath her torn clothing. Intricate beadwork, patterns he had seen before. His neighbor, Pete Morrison, had described them to him just last week. These were the ceremonial beads worn by the family of Chief White Bull, the most powerful Comanche leader in the region. Bear's blood ran cold. If this girl was who he thought she was, then he had just made a choice that could cost him everything. He wasn't just harboring a starving child. He was protecting the daughter of the most feared leader in the Comanche tribe. And Bear knew what that could mean. The girl finished eating and looked up at him, her eyes finally softening, a faint glimmer of gratitude there. But the quiet was short-lived. As Bear sat down to gather his thoughts, the sound of hoofbeats reached his ears. Hooves on the dirt road, growing louder by the second. Bear's heart skipped a beat. He moved to the window, peering out. He saw his neighbor, Cletus Hartwell, riding hard toward the cabin, his face twisted in concern. Behind him rode 2 others, Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison and Reverend Thomas. Bear's gut tightened. He didn't need to hear their words to know what was coming. He stepped outside before Cletus could dismount, hoping to keep the conversation quiet. But as soon as Cletus saw him, he shouted, "Bear, what in the hell are you doing? You've gone and done something you can't undo." Deputy Morrison spoke up, his voice heavy with suspicion. "We saw smoke signals from the hills today. Word is the Comanche are looking for something, or someone. You wouldn't happen to know anything about a missing girl, would you?" Bear's throat went dry. He had to make a choice. Now, he could lie, cover up what he'd done. But Bear wasn't that man. He wasn't a coward, and he wasn't about to turn his back on a child who needed help. Without saying a word, he nodded toward the cabin. "She's inside," he said softly. Cletus and the others exchanged uneasy glances before following Bear inside. Bear's heart pounded faster, and a deep tension settled in his body. He knew this moment had changed his life forever. The decision to shelter the girl, a decision that was anything but small, had now turned into a preparation for war. For him, it was no longer just about protecting a child. It was about survival. As soon as Cletus, Jake, and Reverend Thomas reached Bear, their faces were twisted with anger and fear. Cletus was red-faced, shouting, "Bear, what the hell have you done? What were you thinking? You know you can't undo this." Bear took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow, his gaze steady. "What I did was right. She was just a child. What was I supposed to do?" Jake stepped forward, his voice tight with frustration. "You know better, Bear. You should have sent her back. You don't have a clue what you've set into motion." Bear met Jake's eyes, unwavering. "I won't send her back, Jake. She's just a child. And I'll protect her." The tension between them was palpable, a standoff that only deepened as the seconds ticked by. Cletus scowled. "You've thrown your whole life away, Bear. That girl? She'll be the end of you. Do you really think you can just keep her here and not suffer the consequences?" Bear didn't flinch. "She's not just some pawn in a war. She's a human being. I made my choice, and I'll stand by it." Jake shook his head, eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this, Bear. The Comanche will come. You're not prepared for what's coming." Bear's gaze didn't waver. "I'm prepared to fight, Jake. If they want her, they'll have to come through me first." Reverend Thomas, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice calm but heavy with concern. "Bear, I understand your heart, but you have to see the danger you put yourself in. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the whole ranch, everyone you've ever known." Bear paused, his chest tight with the weight of the words. He knew the preacher was right. This wasn't just about the girl. It was about the future of his land, his home. But as much as the risks weighed on him, Bear's resolve hardened. "I can't turn my back on her. She's innocent in all of this," Bear said, his voice low but firm. "I won't let her pay for something she didn't choose." The men exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions shifting from anger to resignation. They knew that Bear had made his decision, and no amount of pleading would change his mind. Cletus threw his hands up in frustration. "You're a damn fool, Bear. You'll see. The Comanche don't forget. They don't forgive. And when they come for you, there won't be anywhere to hide." Bear met his gaze head on. "Then I'll face them. I'll face whatever comes. But I won't let her die." Reverend Thomas stepped forward, his expression somber. "I'll stand by you, Bear, but know this path will take us all to places we may not return from." Bear nodded, a brief flicker of gratitude crossing his face. "Thank you, Reverend, but we'll stand together or we'll fall alone. I don't have a choice." The wind howled outside, and the silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on them. Bear stood tall, his gaze never leaving the horizon, where the sound of approaching riders could be heard faintly in the distance. Clay, who had been waiting outside, returned to the cabin, his expression grim. "I've spoken to a few folks, Bear. No one's willing to stand with us. Fear's running deep in the town." Bear's jaw tightened. "Then we'll do it alone. We have no choice now." As Bear turned back to the window, watching the distant figures of riders growing closer, he realized the war had already begun. He had no idea how it would end or who would survive, but one thing was certain. He would protect the girl with every breath he had left. The sound of hooves grew louder, closer. Bear's grip on his rifle tightened as he moved toward the cabin's doorway, his heart racing. He had done what he could to prepare, but deep down, he knew there was little they could do to stand against 200 Comanche warriors. They could fortify the cabin, hold their ground for a while, but when Chief White Bull came calling, there would be no negotiating. The leader of the Comanche was a man of honor and fury, and once he made up his mind, no one could stand in his way. The wind had picked up, and the sky had darkened with the promise of an approaching storm. Bear's instincts told him the weather would turn in their favor, masking any movements they made, but it also meant that the Comanche would be on them faster than ever. It was a double-edged sword, storm or no storm. The battle was coming. Clay had already gone out to the back of the cabin, positioning himself in a hidden spot, rifle in hand. He was ready to defend, though Bear could see the doubt in his eyes. The town may have abandoned them, but Clay was sticking by him, loyal as ever. Bear had no illusions that this was a fight they could win, but he was determined to die trying if it meant keeping the girl safe. The door creaked open, and Bear stepped out onto the porch, squinting against the wind. He could make out the shapes of riders in the distance, their figures slowly coming into focus. His pulse quickened as the realization hit him. Chief White Bull had arrived. The rider leading the pack was unmistakable. Tall, regal, with a posture that could make any man tremble. Chief White Bull. His eyes locked onto Bear's from a distance, filled with the unrelenting fury of a father who had lost his daughter. Bear Mallister. The chief's voice carried on the wind, deep and commanding. Bear's stomach tightened as he stepped forward, keeping his rifle at his side. He had no intention of firing unless forced. This was a battle for honor. It was a battle for survival, and he wasn't about to give in without speaking his piece. "I'm here," Bear called back, his voice steady despite the tension building inside him. White Bull slowed his horse as he approached, his warriors following in behind him, dismounting with the grace and precision that only seasoned warriors could achieve. The chief's gaze never left Bear's, his face stoic and unreadable. "You took my daughter," White Bull said, his words sharp as a knife. "I will not let you escape the consequences of that decision." Bear didn't flinch. "I didn't take her for you, Chief. I took her because she was starving, because she needed help. She was just a child." The chief's eyes darkened. "You think mercy means something here? The Comanche don't know mercy. My people have been wronged for too long to offer it now." Bear's chest tightened with the weight of the situation, but he wasn't about to back down. "I didn't wrong you. I didn't take her to provoke war. I took her to save her life." White Bull's expression didn't soften. "You made a choice, Bear Mallister. You knew the risk. You must live with it." The wind howled around them, and for a moment, Bear could hear the distant calls of Comanche warriors, preparing for something. A confrontation. A war that was already in motion. Bear's grip on his rifle tightened, but he kept it lowered, trying to keep the peace. He knew this could turn deadly in a heartbeat. "I will not turn her over, Chief. Not to die at your hands, or anyone else's." The chief's face remained impassive. "You do not have the strength to protect her from what is coming. The Comanche will not forget this." Bear's heart beat in his chest like a drum, but he stood firm. "I'll protect her, Chief, until my last breath." There was a long silence between them, the kind that stretched like a rope pulled too tight. White Bull's eyes flicked to the cabin behind Bear, then back to him. "You think you can fight me, Bear Mallister? You think you can keep my daughter from me without paying the price?" Bear's breath quickened, and he took a step forward. "I won't let you take her. I won't let you kill her." White Bull's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something deadly passing through them. "Then you will face the wrath of the Comanche." The tension in the air was palpable, a charged stillness before the storm. Bear knew that this was the moment. This was the line drawn in the sand. "I'll stand my ground," Bear said quietly, though his voice carried in the wind. "And I'll face whatever comes." White Bull studied him for a moment longer, his gaze weighing Bear like a hawk observing its prey. Then, without a word, he turned his horse around, signaling his warriors to mount. The Comanche began to ride off, their figures vanishing into darkening landscape. Bear watched them leave, his heart pounding, but a sense of uneasy relief settling in his chest. The warriors were gone, for now, but Bear knew they would be back. And when they did, it would be with more than just words. He turned back to the cabin, finding Clay waiting at the door, his rifle still in hand. "They're gone for now," Bear said, his voice thick with the weight of what was coming. "But they'll be back." Clay nodded grimly. "Then we better be ready." Bear knew Clay was right. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed were thick with tension. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, the wind still and the sky heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Bear didn't sleep much, his eyes always scanning the horizon, listening for the faintest sound of hooves. He knew the Comanche would return, and when they did, it would not be to talk. Clay stayed close, helping where he could, but Bear could feel the weight of the world settling on his shoulders. His ranch, his land, his life, everything was on the line. The girl, now awake but still fragile, clung to him in her sleep, unaware of the storm closing around them. Bear had tried to explain the situation to her, but words in a language she didn't understand only went so far. Instead, he kept her close, and as the days passed, he started to prepare for the worst. He fortified the cabin, stacking crates of supplies in the far corners, making sure they would have enough to survive a siege. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but Bear wasn't going to go down without a fight. The night before the final confrontation, Bear sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The land was quiet, unnaturally so. The faint sound of a creek running in the distance was the only sound that broke the silence. Clay joined him, sitting beside him, both men silently watching the last sliver of sunlight disappear. Tomorrow, Bear said, his voice low. Clay didn't need to ask what he meant. Tomorrow, there was nothing left to say. They were as ready as they would ever be. The Comanche would come at dawn. Bear had no illusions about how it would end, but he wasn't about to go down without giving them everything he had. "We'll make it through this," Clay said, though there was a flicker of doubt in his voice. Bear turned to him, his face hard, eyes set with determination that few people ever saw. "We have to. For her." Clay nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "For her." The girl stirred inside the cabin, her tiny form visible through the window. Bear's heart tightened. He had come to care for her in ways he hadn't expected. She wasn't just some lost child. She was a symbol, a representation of everything that had gone wrong, and everything that could still go right. The next morning, as the first rays of light broke across the sky, Bear was already up, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his heart steady with resolve. He walked through the cabin, checking the supplies one last time, making sure everything was in place. The girl sat on the floor, her eyes wide with confusion, her small hands clutching a ragged blanket. Bear knelt beside her, placing a hand on her head. She looked up at him, her face still too thin, too vulnerable. "We'll be okay," he told her, though he didn't believe the words himself. "I won't let them hurt you." She didn't understand, but she smiled up at him anyway, her fragile lips curling upward in a small, innocent gesture that made his heart ache. Bear stood, wiping a tear from his cheek, and walked outside. The sky had darkened with the storm clouds that had been gathering all night. He knew they wouldn't have much time before the Comanche arrived. He motioned for Clay to come. "It's time." Clay walked toward him, rifle in hand, and together they stood side by side, looking out over the horizon. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, slowly getting louder. Bear's grip tightened on his rifle, and he felt the weight of the decision that had led them to this moment. There was no turning back now. And then, as if on cue, the first rider appeared on the horizon, a lone figure, riding in the center of a column of warriors. Bear's breath caught in his throat as a familiar figure of Chief White Bull came into view, his face grim and determined. The time had come. The Comanche warriors, moving in a tight formation, spread out across the land as they approached the cabin. Bear and Clay moved to the front, rifles aimed and ready, the girl hidden safely behind the shelter of the cabin. The storm in the distance raged louder now, the sound of thunder mingling with the growing sounds of hooves. Chief White Bull stopped his horse just a few yards from the cabin, his warriors following suit. His eyes met Bear's once more, the weight of the unspoken tension between them thick in the air. "I gave you a chance. Bear Malister," White Bull called, his voice carrying across the wind. "You chose your path. Now you will pay the price." Bear's voice was steady, unwavering. "I've made my choice. I'm not afraid of you, White Bull. If you want her, you'll have to take her from me." The chief's eyes flickered with something, anger perhaps, or respect, but it was gone in an instant. "So be it." The warriors dismounted in unison, their movements fluid and practiced, like a single entity. Bear and Clay raised their rifles, the sound of the storm matching the pounding of their hearts. They were outnumbered, but they would stand their ground. For the girl, for their lives, for the choice they had made. The wind picked up, whipping through the grass as the battle began. The first shot rang out, and the world seemed to freeze in that moment. Every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of doubt and hope, all came crashing together in the sound of gunfire. Bear fired again, Clay beside him, each shot hitting its mark, but Comanche were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. The fight raged on for what felt like hours. Bear could hear Clay's grunts of exertion beside him, the crack of rifle shots echoing through the land. Every movement, every decision was a fight for survival. In the chaos, Bear saw White Bull's figure break from the warriors, riding towards him with the fury of a storm. Bear raised his rifle one last time, aiming for the leader of the Comanche, but before he could pull the trigger, something stopped him. The girl, she was running toward him, her small form darting across the battlefield, her eyes wide with fear. "Get back!" Bear shouted, his heart leaping into his throat. But she didn't listen. She had no idea the danger she was in. Before he could move, a shot rang out. The world seemed to slow down as Bear watched the girl collapse, her body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. His heart stopped. Everything that had brought him here, everything he had fought for, suddenly shattered. White Bull, seeing the moment, turned his horse, his face impassive. "You made your choice, Bear Malister," he said coldly, "and you will live with the consequences." Bear dropped to his knees beside the girl, tears streaming down his face, his hands trembling as he tried to hold her. She was gone, and in that moment, he realized the war wasn't just for survival. It was for a future that could never be reclaimed. The storm raged on,